Tell if you like, Jim heard as he walked into the Oriental gift shop. The store was empty except for an old Asian woman sitting behind the counter, her dark, slanted eyes giving him a curious look as he walked down a narrow aisle lined with shelves displaying all kinds of curios and gifts. He sniffed the air and noticed a smoking incense stick sticking out of a small jade box on the counter where the lady sat. "Smells nice in here," he said, trying to strike up a conversation. She didn't respond. She watched him explore the shelves until he walked up to the counter and said, "I'm looking for a gift, for a woman." She responded with a sly smile, before stepping from behind the counter and leading him to the back room. That's when he noticed the graceful, leaf-shaped gold armlet on her right arm and the tight mandarin dress she wore. His gaze traveled down to her nicely shaped backside, her trim yet curvy hips swaying with each step, a hint of ivory thigh peering from the waist-high slits, as the tap of her black, stiletto heels echoed in the dim interior. A little too provocative for someone's grandmother, Jim thought. But a nice ass. The old woman must have read his mind. She looked at him and giggled as they stopped in front of a wall lined with shelves. Jim avoided her gaze but was unprepared for the spectacle before him. They stood in front of a table covered with phalluses of every size, color and texture. On the shelves were dozens of 3-inch high, nude figurines. He gazed at a riot of naked men and women. Some masturbated by themselves. Others were involved in everything from one-on-one sex to orgies that would have broken the laws in a few states. She selected a woman kneeling with her mouth wide open and said, called Natsuki. Very detailed, yes. She turned it to reveal tiny painted hairs around 2 holes. One for the pussy, another for the anus. Very realistic. Arrange any way you like, the woman said. She placed a kneeling man with an erection behind the woman and slid the porcelain cock into the anus. I guess, Jim replied. His gaze wandered to the figurine of a dark-haired beauty lying on a jade couch. He saw a tiny gold band around the arm. The old woman noticed this and picked it up. You like? Embarrassed, Jim backed away. No, that's okay, he said and bumped against the table, almost knocking down a big phallus. He picked it up without thinking, waved it around and said, I was just looking for a vase or jewelry box. Noticing what it was he was waving around, he set it down quickly and blushed. The woman seemed disappointed. She pointed to the front vases near window. Go pick one. I give good price. Jim hurried to front of the store. He quickly scanned the shelves, found a very proper-looking vase and walked back to the counter where the old woman was wrapping a small parcel. She smiled, rang up the vase, gave him the change and handed over the parcel. I didn't pay for that, Jim said. A gift. You like incense, yes? She said while pressing the package in his hand. He stammered, yes, but. The woman stepped from behind the counter, led him to the door and said, you take a gift. She opened the door, the sound of the chimes almost drowned out by the passing traffic. Jim found himself pushed outside. I have to close. You open tonight before sleep. Enjoy. Bright sunlight and loud traffic greeted his eyes and ears. The woman locked the door and pulled down the Shade. His beeper went off. It was the office. Damn. He thought, I'll be late for the afternoon meeting. He shuffled the packages in his hands. I'll come back to tomorrow and return this thing, he said to himself and walked back to the office. Natalie, Jim's secretary, admired the vase's intricate designs. I love it, where did you get it? The Oriental shop down the street, Jim responded. She gave him a confused look. I thought that place was closed for the week. I know the owner. He's on vacation with his niece. It was open. An older Asian woman was at the counter. Well, it's mine now. She smiled and flounced off to show it to the other secretaries. Jim got home tired and puzzled. The shop had been closed, so Natalie said. But it hadn't. It was open. After a quick shower, he put on his pajamas, sat on his bed and opened the old woman's gift. Might as well see what it's like, he muttered while unwrapping it. It was a jade incense box adorned with designs and fine patterns he couldn't make out. A few incense sticks and a small object wrapped in red paper lay inside. After unwrapping it, he saw to his surprise it was the nude Asian woman on the jade couch. Great. Now I have to go back tomorrow. She'll probably say I stole it. He stared at the figurine. It was real, so detailed. Her body was perfectly proportioned, the nipples dark and full, tipping a pair of round, inviting breasts. The hips tapered from a small waist and led to a pair of smooth, shapely legs. The eyes were half closed, the full, red lips tempting and seductive. I wonder what it would be like to kiss those lips, Jim thought, feeling his cock stir. He sighed, ran his fingers along the tiny, yet perfect body and thought how pathetic he was. Here I am getting horny over a porcelain figure. Lighting an incense stick, he placed it through one of the holes on the box. On lying down, he saw the bulge of his cock under the sheets and said out loud, "Guess you won't let me sleep tonight." He wrapped his hand around the stiff member but decided he didn't feel like masturbating. The incense had a calming effect. After a deep breath, Jim felt himself sliding into sleep, still feeling the hardness of his erection in his fist. After what seemed like a few seconds, he woke up naked under the sheets and immediately turned to look at the incense stick. It was still burning, but the figurine was missing. Hearing a noise, he turned and saw the most beautiful sight in his entire life. A gorgeous Asian woman with long black hair and wearing a tight red mandarin dress stood next to his bed. Creamy thighs and hips peeked out of waist-high slits and the outline of her nipples pressed against the thin fabric. She bowed politely and sat next to him. She smelled of cherry blossom. As she leaned close to his face, Jim recognized the leaf-shaped band on her right arm. Before he could make any comment, she held the back of his head and gave him a deep, passionate kiss. Her breath tasted sweeter than honey and she purred like a kitten as her tongue gently probed into his mouth. Might as well enjoy this dream, he thought as he leaned into her kiss. Raising his hands, he gently massaged her supple back. The purr turned into a moan. She responded by kneading his arms and chest. It was his turn to gasp when her long red nails glided over the area just above his throbbing cock. This has got to be the fullest, hardest ass I've ever held. he thought, squeezing her firm yet pliant buttocks. She leaned back, gave him a playful smile and pulled down the sheets, exposing his penis. Her eyes glistened like two black pools. She crossed her legs, allowing her thighs and most of her hips to emerge from the slits of her dress. "Am I glad I'm a leg man?" Jim said. She gave him a coy look, took his hand and ran it over her bare thighs, stomach and the inviting swell of her right breast. Her nipples seemed to dig into his palm. Then she climbed on the bed, straddled his chest and undid her dress. In a slow, languid manner, the red fabric cascaded down her body, revealing the creamy glory of her upturned, generously tipped breasts, her slim waist and inviting hips. Jim instantly feasted on her nipples, making her gasp and hiss as his hand traveled to the wet, silky hairs of her crotch. His fingers slipped into the tightest pussy he had ever encountered. Her gasping turned into deep, throaty moans. She sat up, took his fingers from her crotch and licked the juices with her darting tongue. Jim understood. He eased down to her thighs, his tongue traveling over her moist, puffy lips and into her juicy love hole. He sucked at her prissy little clit, nibbling and blowing his breath over the hard little bud. She giggled with delight. He glanced up, saw her enjoying her breasts and resumed his feast, alternating between deep probes and gentle nibbles. The technique worked. He felt her buttocks clench and writhe. She arched her back, gave a loud moan that was almost a scream and uttered her only word for the night. Yes. Her body seemed to collapse for a moment. She got off. His face cuddled on the pillow next to his and lapped her juices off his cheeks, lips and chin. Her tongue licked his neck as she pressed his veined meat between her breasts and rubbed his throbbing pole, making him gasp as a faint stream of jism shot out and land on her right cheek. Must be ready to come, he thought, shrugging an apology. She just smiled, wiped her cheek and licked the pearly drop off her palm. Her face now hovered just above his hard member. She licked the tip, playfully bit the head and ran her tongue over his shaft before parting her lips and drawing him into her mouth. Feels like butterfly wings, he thought as her lips enveloped him. She sucked gently at first, then harder, moving her exquisite face up and down as she reached up with one hand and began to toy with his nipples. His pulse surged in his ears as he gripped the sheets and gasped for air. Her other hand reached between his legs gently, scratching his tense sack. The surge in his body became a torrent of pleasure he could barely control until that familiar, hot, wet feeling gushed out of his body and exploded in her mouth. He could barely hear her loud, sucking sounds, her almost purr-like moans making that whiskey mouth gently vibrate, sending ripples of pleasure until Jim woke up. He was alone, in his bed, still in his pajamas. He looked under the sheets, expecting a wet, sticky coating on his pants. He was dry. "Strangest wet dream I ever had," he murmured. He looked at the night table. The figurine was there, next to the incense box, the wick now small and spent. The last thing Jim thought of was the face on the figurine. He eyed her closely and was surprised to see her expression seemed changed. She looked pleased, and dare he think it, satisfied. He stopped by the store the next day and rattled the door handle. No one at home. The only thing greeting him was a closed sign indicating the owners would return in a week. That night, his cock staring at the memory of the previous night, he decided to light the incense one more time. It was just a dream, he thought. Something in his mind said otherwise as the aroma covered him and he drifted into sleep. The last thing he saw before his eyes closed was the figurine, her skin seeming to shine with life. He woke up on a mat in a room lined with blackened red panels, glossy in the glow of Chinese lanterns. He was naked underneath a black cotton kimono. One of the panels slid aside as he got up. Two lovely Oriental girls in tight Chinese dresses stepped into the room. One wore red, the other green. Although the air was warm, their nipples pressed against the silky fabric, the ivory glory of the naked hips and thighs peering from the waist-high slits. Smiling seductively, the girls bowed and introduced themselves. The girl in the green dress bowed first. "I'm Jade." Eyes twinkling, the other girl followed. "I'm Pearl." Jim made the decision to follow their example and got to his feet. Bowing proved quite astonishing, the motion making his erection poke out from his kimono. Jade and Pearl giggled. Blushing, he covered his exposed member and tried to regain some semblance of control. It didn't work. Seeing his embarrassment, the girls exchanged knowing glances and guided him to a corridor illuminated by paper lamps, finally stepping through an open panel into another room. Paper lanterns hanging from ornate dragon's heads set into the walls cast a warm, yellow light on the floor mats. Taking his hands in theirs, the girls led him to a chair. He sat down full of excitement, his knob piercing through the opening in his kimono like some kind of oriental obelisk. Pearl began undressing, her silky attire falling to the ground and revealing a luscious, naked body. He didn't know why he hadn't felt Jade tying his hands to the chair, and although he struggled, he didn't really mind that much, especially when Jade diverted his attention. The green silk dress slid off her body, she stood naked and inviting, her flesh almost golden in the glow of lantern light. Both girls turned their backs to each other and bent over, slowly rubbing each other's round buttocks, their pleasing sighs and purring moans music to his ears. Then, Jade turned and ran her nipples down Pearl's back before kneeling, her pliant fingers probing the wet, luscious crotch in front of her face. Jim was very aware that his cock had acquired a mind of its own. Even if his hands had been free, nothing would have stopped it standing proud. Oh, how it ached for their attention, for just one of them to finger its sweating tip or lick its length with the delicate tongues. The girls continued to perform in front of him, Jade now enjoying the oral ministrations of Pearl's invading tongue. Jim groaned. This was torture. Pure hell in fact. 2 gorgeous Asian beauties pleasing each other's naked bodies, and all he could do was watch. A gong suddenly sounded. A panel slid open. Jade and Pearl ceased their activities, stood and bowed as a figure in a black robe, the face hidden behind a golden mask, glided into the room. Unsure who the new person was and what might happen next, Jim's erection went soft. Would his dream turn into a nightmare? Both girls crawled on all fours to the robed person, but not even the sight of the pretty asses could allay his concern. On reaching the figure, each girl was raised to her feet by a pair of beautiful hands emerging from the dark fabric. Long red nails and noble fingers adorned by gold rings glistened in the candlelight. Still tense in his body and flaccid in his cock, Jim watched his fear dissipating once he glimpsed the glitter of a gold band on the left arm. Jade pulled down the hood as Pearl undid the robe. The mask was removed. It was her, the woman from his dream. She smiled at him as the robe slid off her body, revealing the same creamy skin and ample curves from the night before. Pearl and Jade took the lids off tall jars standing to either side of her, dipped their hands in and brought him out again. The scent of mimosa and jasmine filled the air as they rubbed the scented oil all over the woman's body. What a show, Jim thought as two pairs of delicate hands massaged oil over the woman's ivory breasts, stomach and inviting hips. The woman smiled directly at him as Pearl knelt and began licking her pussy. Jim groaned. He could still remember the way it tasted, sweet with just a hint of tartness. Jade wasted no time. She ran her tongue down her mistress's back, over the cleft of her perfect ass and began licking her anus. The woman was gasping in delight as both girls probed her luscious flower and delectable back door. She gave Jim a wicked, inviting look and tapped Jade's shoulder. The girl giggled, got up and ran to him. Kneeling, she untied the ropes, took him by the hand and led him to her mistress, her lowered eyes admiring his throbbing meat. By now Pearl and the woman were on the floor, their heads buried between each other's luscious thighs. Quickly, and without any sign of her intention, Pearl rolled underneath, grabbed her mistress's buttocks and revealed the inviting sight of her anus. Jade knelt, pulled Jim down onto his knees, took his cock in her dainty hands, and guided him until he was just outside of the rim of the woman's tight rosebud. Jade pressed his back, allowing him to slowly glide inside. Jim gasped with delight. He had never experienced anal sex before. The sensation was like having a tight velvet glove surrounding his shaft. Inching slowly inwards, he relished the sensation of her body slowly yielding to his penetration. He pumped gently, determined that she would enjoy the exercises much as he was. He didn't care if it was a dream or not. He didn't want to force or hurt her. The woman sensed this. The sight of her exotic, cat-like eyes looking at him over her shoulder was almost enough to make him come. But not yet. Sensing his concern for her, she said her first word for the night. Deeper. Jim obliged. He slid further into her back door. She moaned and hissed more loudly. Her body shuddered under his and her rounded cheeks pressed against his lap. As he continued to thrust, Pearl feasted on her mistress's breasts while Jade massaged the woman's clitoris with her delicate fingers, sometimes licking Jim's nipples, sometimes kissing the woman's red lips. Gradually, that delicious warm feeling coursing through his body accumulated into a gush of pleasure that ached for release. The sensation spread so quickly and so intensely until he felt ready to shatter into a million pieces. Just when he felt he couldn't wait any longer, she peered at him over her ivory shoulders and gasped the word he wanted to hear. Yes. His body racked and heaved. Her hands reached round and clutched his buttocks, pressing him in even deeper. And then it happened. Suddenly his pleasure gushed out of His body. Pearl and Jade continued the tongue probing, kisses and erotic caresses until he woke up. Still in his pajamas. In his bed. Alone. He looked for the figurine. It was gone. He almost tore his apartment apart that night, looking for the naked Oriental beauty of his dreams. Frustrated, he went to sleep, alone and tired. A week later, acting purely on instinct, he went to the store. The chimes rang as he entered. An old man sat behind the counter and asked, "Can I help you?" Jim didn't know what to say. He'd expected the old woman. "Yes, where is the lady that was here 3 days ago?" The man gave a quizzical look. "We've been closed. I was on vacation with my niece." Feeling a bit of a fool, Jim avoided the old man's questioning look. He pretended to be interested in looking around the shop. Suddenly his gaze fell on a blackened, white photo of a woman under the glass counter. He stared, and when he saw the old man's hands grab the picture, began to mutter an apology. "Sorry. I didn't mean to be rude." The old man smiled and set the picture on the counter. Jim tensed. The picture was old, but the woman sitting on the ornate chair looked familiar. She wore a tight fitting mandarin dress with a waist-high slit on either side. A gold, leaf-shaped band encircled her left arm. "That's my wife," the old man said. Jim looked up, startled. He didn't know if he should feel scared or guilty. "Your wife?" "Yes, she died 2 years ago. She made me the happiest man alive." The old man eyed the picture fondly. "She promised me her soul would not rest until she found the perfect man for our daughter." The door chimes rang. A feminine voice called, "Father, I brought lunch." Jim turned as a beautiful Asian woman in business attire walked up to the counter. "Chia," the old man said. "We were talking about your mother." The girl turned to Jim and smiled. "Hello." The clear bell of her voice rang in his ear. His eyes traveled over a tight yet lusciously curved body her tailored business suit seemed to cling to. A mane of black, lustrous hair surrounded her delicate face. Her cool black eyes smiled back at him, her eyebrows a pair of startled raven's wings, her coral lips slightly parted, revealing pearly teeth. His throat felt very tight. The "hello" he finally managed to give her, sounding more like a croak through the surging pulse in his ear. The old man noticed how they stared at each other. He glanced at his wife's picture, then turned back to Jim. "Won't you join us for lunch?" Jim couldn't hide his surprise. "I wouldn't want to intrude." For some reason this made the old man laugh. "I'll set another place." He left the two of them alone. Jim looked at the bag Chia held. "Let me help you." "Thank you," she replied. He stood with the bag in his hand and watched as she removed her blazer, revealing a gossamer sleeveless blouse. Suddenly, Jim's mind reeled. It wasn't the way her blouse clung to her high, upturned breasts and the way the silken fabric hinted at the sublime yet generous outline of her erect nipples. It was the gold, leaf-shaped band she wore on her left arm and the way it seemed to glisten with a light of its own. She noticed him staring. "It used to belong to my mother. Some people think it's too provocative." She stepped a little closer, a coy, playful look on her delicate face, and gave him a delightfully questioning smile, the inviting contours of her body now inches away. What do you think? He smiled while gazing into those two dark pools. I like it very much.